All right, hip internal rotation from the 90-90 position, PAILS and rails. Long name, gonna be a decent explanation, but once you get it down, this is probably the most important PAIL and rail we do because hip internal rotation is the golden egg of hip function. When we have better hip internal rotation, lay down, Jesse, real quick, with your hip, so internal rotation, in the assessment was this right here, okay? The better we have in terms of rotation there, the better off we're going to be. Jesse, we know, needs to improve his hip internal rotation. We want to get him closer, like he's like maybe 20 degrees right here. Maybe you can get a little bit farther, go by yourself. Yeah, sorry. Maybe 20. We want him more in the 30 to 35 range, and that's what we looked at in our assessment. Now, when we get into the 90-90 position, let's go ahead and get in that. If we've evaluated your hip and said, hey, your right hip needs more internal rotation, I want when you're in this position, your back hip should be your right hip. If it's left, then we switch it around. But for our example purposes, we'll stick with the right. When we're in the 90-90 position, 90 degrees right here, 90 degrees right here. He's looking for a stretch, move your arm right here, back on the bottom side of his hip, like kind of in his butt, like really deep inside the joint there. If you don't feel that, adjust around a little bit. I don't want to say don't do the stretch, but try to adjust. So if he doesn't feel it right away, he might lean back a little more. He might try to tilt his pelvis different directions. The whole goal is to feel it here and not here. So if the only thing you can find is pinching here, this is the wrong stretch for you. We'll find a different option. From this position, once we found the stretch in that bottom side of the hip, very deep again, we need to hold that position for 2 minutes. So this is the first part of the PAIL and rail, a 2-minute stretch. Do not skip that. That's very important. After we do a 2-minute stretch, we're then going to do a 10-second ramp up, a 10-second PAILS contraction, and a 10-second rails contraction. The PAILS, when you hear PAILS, think push. So PAILS equals push. For this position, his PAILS contraction is going to be trying to drive his right foot down into the ground. So ramping up tension, he's going to try to push his foot down. If the ground wasn't there, he'd be doing that motion. So I'm using my hip to try to visualize the rotation down into the ground. We start with a 10-second ramp up. So pretend I have a little tension dial and I turn that tension up. So we start at 10% tension, pushing down right here. I can feel him pushing his foot and ankle into the ground. Then we go to 20%. Then we go to 30%, then 40, 50, all the way to 100%, and we hold that 100% for 10 seconds. That's our max effort PAILS contraction, is pushing down as hard as you can for 10 seconds. Immediately after those 10 seconds, you switch, and we try to drive the foot up as high as we can. So that's the rails contraction. So PAILS is pushing down into the ground, and then rails is trying to lift the foot up. Jesse is in his end range of motion, as you should be, which means that when he tries to lift off this foot, what happens? Try to lift off. It doesn't happen, okay? Now, if he were to lean forward real quick, and if he were to come out of that stretch, he could lift off a little bit, right? Not much, but it's there, right? So when we're trying to do this rail, your goal is to try to lift this foot up, but it's not going to happen. The whole goal is we're going to contract maximally with this part of the hip, and then we're going to contract maximally with this part of the hip. So both sides are going to get worked, hoping that over time, as you put more and more internal tension into the body, it will function better at that end range of motion. Let's go through a full rep so you can see exactly what this looks like. So I've been talking for hopefully at least 2 minutes. Jesse's now been in that stretch for 2 minutes. We're going to do a 1 rep of PAILS and rails in this position. We're going to drive this foot down starting at 10% tension, very light. Good. 20% tension, push a little harder. 30% tension, a little harder. 40% tension, 50, 60, 70, 80. Keep turning that tension dial up. 90, max effort, really push, go. 10, 9, come on hard, Jesse, more, push, squeeze, tension, good. 3, 2, 1, opposite direction. Try to drive that foot up off the ground. Squeeze that right hip. We're switching right to the rails. Rails is trying to pick that foot up off the ground. He's trying as hard as he can. 3, 2, 1. Breathe. He relaxes. Usually we'll do 2. Sometimes we'll do 3 reps. We just completed 1 rep. We then repeat the same process without the 2-minute stretch. So he might sit here for 30 more seconds. After 30 seconds, when he feels recovered enough, he will do 1 more rep. If you're doing this really hard, it should be very intense. Not painful, but you might cramp, right? Cramping's okay. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to train that nervous system to function better in the end range of motion. To summarize, 90-90 position, stretching the bottom part of the hip, 2-minute stretch, PAILS pushing down, ramping up for 10 seconds,